breaking news, you heard it here first. So we all know about the light beams that UFOs use to take up people and cattle into their craft. Well, the breaking news is scientists have actually now created a light particle system that can actually hold something in place and move it. And that's called optical tweezers. So, all right, it's only an atom at the moment, but down the line, they expect to be able to do surgeries where you can actually, go inside a body without actually even going inside a body. Now, if anyone that's done any research on UFOs know that when they heal people, aliens, they use a light beam. So we're now getting to their technology of actually healing people using light. Now, going back to this, obviously, if we can now manipulate, eventually down the line, we will be able to lift things up. Right, this is going to be fun for you guys. This is classed as a solar ship in Egypt. And recently they've almost finished assembling a second solar ship that they've found in Egypt. And these are dated 4,500 years ago. Just read this. So it says here that the pharaoh, which was Khufu, they believe, used the actual craft himself. Now, this, bear in mind, solar ship. Solar means sun, pretty much. So let's have a look what Google says. That Ra. Now, Ra was Marduk, who was an Anunnaki that travelled in spaceships. So Ra's solar boat ship, was called a solar bark, however you pronounce that. But they show a picture of the normal boat. So in other words, this is a normal boat. Ra's ship that flies in space and across the air is the solar ship. Boat. If you believe in the dates that the mainstream give us about our ancient history, then feel free to move on. But if you're open to suggestion, these are my, after 40 odd years of research, these are the dates that I've concluded. So Eridu, official date 5,400. Really, it was 450,000 years ago. So I'm just going to let you read it here yourself. Abzu with the Anunnaki, no such thing in mainstream, but of course there was 449 or say 450,000 years ago. Humans, 200,000 years ago from the official date, and correct, that's what I got. The list goes on. I'm going to run out of time, but I am actually doing a whole map of where everyone went, where all the Anunnaki went, and what times, etc., etc. So hopefully this has given you some indication of. I'll be putting this on my Patreon page if anyone's interested. Were the Anunnaki really the gods of ancient Egypt and Rome, etc.? Let's have a look. So here's a map showing that Egypt, which is where the Anunnaki were at one point in time, and go across, and you'll see that's where Mesopotamia was. There's Sumer. And later on in times, this map showing 1450 BC, we had the Babylonians, the Assyrians. There's Nineveh, which is where the Library of Nineveh, which is where Zachariah Sitchin got some of his information from stone tablets from. But if you go back here, you look, there's Crete. So let's just have a look over here. And there's Egypt, which is where the Anunnaki were as well. And Iraq, which is Mesopotamia. And look, there's a hop, skip and a jump to Greece and then Rome. So where we've got the Anunnaki showing up in those locations, they didn't show up so much there or there, but they did there, and it makes sense because it's all localized to where they would go. And it's nice weather. Who's lying, me or the mainstream? So my dates for the ancient history, floods, pyramids, etc., seem to be mostly different from mainstream. So people was asking me, well, why is yours different? And that's because I actually go by the ancient texts. Now, these ancient texts are found, were mainly found in the Library of Nineveh. Obviously, there's loads that was found all over, scattered all over the place as well. But basically, they talk about the dates. So the dates are referred to originally as shahs, and then about 10,000 years ago, it turned into human years that we're aware of now. So we know a shah is 3,600 years. So when these tablets, which even the British Museum has, they even have the Noah's Ark tablet, which reads just like Sitchin's book, Lost Book of Enki. So we can actually date things, and that's how I did it. I was doing a live chat last night, and a numpty says, there's no such thing, you're lying, blah, blah, blah. And I was talking about Sumerian information, basically the Anunnaki. And so I sort of then said, hey, Numpty, there is such a thing as all these tablets. And then Numpty said that they're basically fake. So I just thought I'd point out that there's a particular part on the BritishMuseum.org where you can actually type in collections. And if you type in, for example, the word Enki, which is an Anunnaki person, you will actually come up with their cylinder seals and where they're from, etc. And then you can look more into detail in them. Same goes for Murdoch, who was an Anunnaki as well. And so, in other words, the British Museum actually has the information that I'm talking about and that Zecharia Sitchin spoke about. So when someone says to me, they're not real, just go to the British Museum. Stonehenge in ancient Egypt. Now, if you've been watching my videos or you've done your own research, you'll know that Ninurta, which was the son of Enlil, was asked to go around and build these calendars around the world, which he did. So this is in southern Egypt, and then you've got one here in Gambia in West Africa, and you've got one obviously in the UK, but the main Stonehenge we all know about, and there's one here in Scotland, but the farm owner says that he knocked it up in 1990. However, there's records showing that it's actually older than that, so you've got people that do lie for whatever reason, paid to lie maybe. And then you've got ones here that says there's some in Aberdeenshire and some in south west of Ireland, which look like that, and then you've got a beautiful one in South Africa, called Adam's Calendar, which literally is an amazing sight to see. So they are around the world. Some are destroyed, but some are. Why giants didn't build the Great Pyramid, and that's because at the period when the Great Pyramids were built, the giants were classed as evil, and that was after the flood. Now, the giants had gigantism. I'm possibly the only person that's actually worked that out, but it makes sense if you watch my other videos. I do explain why. Now, the Book of Enoch talks about the Nephilim being the giants of old, and they ended up being cannibals and eating themselves as well as humans. Now, that means that the people, the Anunnaki's children that had the gigantism ended up having obviously deformities, etc. And we know that not all of them did, because Adam and Eve is actually the offspring of Enki, which was an Anunnaki and a human. And they were, obviously, technically, Adam and Eve was demigods, believe it or not, but they didn't have gigantism, so therefore we have a bloodline from these people. Now, there possibly was a giant in between all of these, but there's no record of one, in other words, a Nephilim. So it goes down to Noah. Now, Noah was around with the flood, as we all know. Now, the giants came pretty much after or around this period, and then after the flood as well. Now, the flood, people seem to assume that the flood was done deliberately to get rid of the giants, in which case, when the pyramids were built after the flood, they wouldn't ask for a giant's help if they was trying to kill them during the flood. Now, that's technically not actually true about that they wanted to kill the giants. That would have been a byproduct of the flood, which wasn't really a flood. It was a tsunami. Watch my other videos in order if you want to know more about that. So the Lost Book of Enki, and this is genuine. You just go to the British Museum. There's 130,000 tablets. Many of them are actually what's in this book that's translated by Sitchin. And you'll see that in the ancient tablets, it talks about the period being built by Ningazida, which was an Anunnaki, around 10,000 BCE, before Christ. Now, there's papers out there now. People are starting to wake up, like the Express, saying that it's actually 12,000 pyramids 12,000 years ago, which would make sense from now. Obviously, 10,000 years from Christ, so because there's a 2,000 year difference. So there's no way they would have had the giants building these if they were trying to kill them off, because they would have A, been killed off, and B, there wasn't many of them around at the time. So it's illogical to think that they would have got giants to build these things, in my opinion. Part of an alien spacecraft found in Prince Sabu's tomb in Saqqara in Egypt in the late 30s. Well, actually, we actually don't know what it's for. It's got various different people have said different things. So really, we don't know what it's for. But the most important thing is what was with it. Now, the actual person that looked into it and found it was this gentleman here, Walter Brian Emery. And he worked for University of Liverpool and the Archaeological Survey of Nubia. Now, both of these are known to the Rockefellers. Now, this might be a two-part video because it's so interesting. So, hear me out. So, in the 1920s, 25, 26, the Rockefellers offered £10 million to the Cairo Museum. And that is so that they could take over and actually put their own people in. Follow for part 2. Really important you listen to this if you need to know our true history. So this was a diagram of what would have been a new Cairo museum back in 1925-26, which was offered by the Rockefellers $10 million to actually build it and run it. Of course, the Egyptian government didn't actually like that because it means that whatever went into the Egyptian new museum was under the control of the Rockefellers. So in other words, if they came across an artifact that wasn't what they wanted it to be, in other words, an alien artifact, they could just quite simply remove it. So in the end, the Egyptian government said, no, we're not going to allow you to do that. But interestingly, though, the Rockefellers actually ended up creating their own museum in Jerusalem. So now when people excavate things, as I was mentioning in the last video, they have full control over what gets put anywhere and hidden in big vaults. This site here, 10 interesting facts about Egypt. Let's go through a few of them, and you know they're not going to be correct. 1, the Egyptians invented the 365-day calendar. Incorrect, because Book of Enoch, which predates this, talks about 365 days, and they create the henges, which you're probably familiar with, Stonehenge, and that is an actual calendar for 365 days, so that's wrong. Number 2, the world's oldest dress was found here. That's probably correct. That's only simply because it was the most well preserved. Doesn't mean there wasn't older dresses. 3, the Great Pyramid was not built by slaves. So you think, oh, brilliant, these people know what they're talking about. And then they end up going on about the paid labourers, which there were paid people well after the pyramids were built. But the pyramids were built just after the flood, when there was hardly any people around to even help the Anunnaki build them. So I'm just running out of time, but you get the idea. These sites just make me laugh.
Have you ever left the fridge door open and wasted food? You can now attach this small fridge door alarm to your fridge or freezer door. You can choose a setting for how long you want to wait before it beeps. It starts low, then gets louder the longer the door is open. It also works with these type of fridge freezers by placing it on top of the door. To find out more, visit fridgedoораlarm.com or buy it on eBay.
I'm currently working on a world map that shows where the Anunnaki were, where they went, what times, and who they were in different places. So, for example, Horon, who was the name for an Anunnaki, was actually Horus in Egypt. So you will get an idea of where they went, who it was, why they went to become Greek gods, etc., and what time frame. So you can see that they disappeared from one place to another, and obviously some of this will be backed up by mainstream science. Obviously, we know that mainstream science deliberately try and play down some of these dates. As if you've watched my previous videos, you'll see. So this world map, I think, will be absolutely invaluable. It shows you that the Anunnaki went to India, etc. I don't think anyone's ever done anything like this before, and please let me know if this is something you'd be interested in seeing. So you will have all the different names for each Anunnaki and where they were. Massive map. Let me know. Hang on, why are the Anunnaki connected to the Egyptian gods? Really? Seriously, how can we even connect the two? I mean, mainstream don't even admit that there's Anunnaki. They admit that there's Enki and Enlil, etc., because it's written in stone tablets, and they can't deny that are in the British Museum. But come on, that's a bit of a stretch to say the Anunnaki ended up in Egypt, isn't it? Well, actually, no. So here's some drawing stroke hieroglyphics on the temple wall of Edfu, and it talks about Horus, Osiris, Isis, and Set and the battle that they had. Now, if you go over to the British Museum, you'll find that they actually have the tablets that talk about Asar, which was Osiris, Asta, which is Isis, Satu, which is Set, and Horon, which is Horus, actually saying the same story as the Egyptian story. So we have 100% proof that they are connected. Are the wings depicted on Anunnaki actually really wings, or are they something else? Well, in ancient texts it talks about Horon, which was actually Horus, who was an Anunnaki, was given wings, gibble wing sandals. Now, what if the translation of sandals was actually wrong and it should have been back, for example, instead of sandals, in which case that would explain why the Anunnaki have wings on their backs. Now, the actual Egyptians also had the wings on their backs, just as I said with Horon, or Horus as it's also known in Egyptian times. So what if they actually were like winged suits and could fly? Now, the actual description was that they could fly like, in the ancient text, they could fly like a falcon. So maybe these wings are not symbolic after all. Maybe they did actually fly from the tops of the mountains as described in the ancient texts. What is this? It's a mummified scarab beetle. The effort they went through to mummify a little beetle like this. Now, normally we associate the scarab beetle in Egypt with life after death, etc. However, there are other properties. If you watch my previous videos about levitation of the wings of scarab beetles, you'll see there's a possibility that they use that same design to help move the blocks. But here's another example of showing you that these seem to have, and although you'll think this is static, it's not actually static. It's to do with the cones on the inside. Please watch my previous videos to understand more on that. And quick message from fridgedoораlarm.com. This is a place where you can buy a fridge door alarm, and you can set it to however long you want before your fridge door alarm goes off. I know some fridge freezers have them already, but if you don't, you can buy them here. They send to Let me tell you why aliens are not real. So I was doing a live last night and I had people saying aliens are not real. I've even had people saying demons are real but aliens are not, even though we kind of know that there's other planets but we don't know there's hell. Anyway, the reason why basically people don't know or don't believe in aliens is simply, very simple, they haven't researched. So if you research things, after a period of time, you will come across the answers. Unfortunately, the people that say there's no such thing as aliens watch mainstream TV and haven't actually researched themselves. So they're obviously not aware of, for example, the Rendlesham Forest incident with military actually admitting that there was UFOs. They don't know about the Roswell incident unless they believe that it was a weather balloon, in which case they really are. I've got some fresh air I can sell you. The Phoenix Lights incidents, which thousands and thousands of people saw, and loads took videos of this craft that was at least a mile wide flying over.
Everything is connected. In a world you thought you knew, one book will change the way you look at life forever. 30 years of research explains how Earth was smashed into. Discover the real name of the alien race we call the Anunnaki. Learn why everything started in ancient Mesopotamia, now modern Iraq. Examine the proof between humans, Anunnaki, and Egyptian rulers. You will find out that there were real giants living with humans. The pyramids were not tombs. They were technical devices built by aliens and man. Do you believe the dinosaurs all died out millions of years ago? Think again. Who really is on the dark side of our moon? Understand who really controls Earth. Crop circles are not just created by man. Look inside the book and discover the mysterious forces at work. Bigfoot is not a myth. They are real and connected to aliens. Everything you need to know and so much more at your fingertips. Available from Amazon, Kindle, and OurUntoldHistory.com.
Stop right there, or else I'll make the sun disappear. Are you aware that your spirit, which is the light energy being, makes a contract with God? It's called a soul contract. Back in the days they used to call it. And before it joins with you 3 to 4 months while you're in the mother's womb, it actually has a job to do. So it's given a job by God. Now, obviously, those of you that's watched my videos realise that the Bible is actually talking about the Anunnaki, not God. So in which case, who does the light energy being stand in front of? Well, it's actually a council of aliens. And the Egyptians knew this, and the Anunnaki knew this at that point in time, where they actually even wrote a book called Emerald Tablets of Thoth. So I actually discuss that on my Patreon page, and it's a long video going through the passages of who the Council of Seven are that gives the spirit the job. So if you're interested, that's on my Patreon page, Our True History. Thank you. Regardless what religion you are, we all have to agree that the Bible is a copy of ancient texts which belong to the Anunnaki, which was an alien race on another planet, and I'll tell you why in a second that you have to believe that. So this is what an Anunnaki would have looked like: white beard. However, they did have a turban for most of their period until they went to Greece, but and here's the size of a human compared to an Anunnaki, and that's a small Anunnaki. So the reason why I say you have to believe that it's the Anunnaki's text is because straight away there's a tablet in the British Museum that actually talks about Enki telling Noah how to build the ark. Now this predates the Bible by thousands of years, so the Bible is a copy, and there's other texts that the Bible obviously copied from cuneiform. So the reason why I say all of this is because the next 10 videos I'm doing are going to be based on the plagues of Egypt, and I didn't want people thinking that there's an almighty being when we're really talking about the Anunnaki. The first plague of Egypt was Moses putting his staff in the water and poisoning it red. But we need to look at the players. So over here in Jerusalem was the Israelites. Now I think they were called the Enulites because Enlil was actually there. So forget the almighty being, because technically it is not the almighty being. It's Enlil and Enki, for example. So Enlil was here. The Israelites had a famine. And we know that not from an almighty being, but actually written by the stone tablets called Artrahasis, which literally talk about Enlil saying, block off the waters so they will starve, there's too many people. So he was trying to kill people. So the Enulites ended up, not Israelites, ended up in Egypt for salvation. However, at the time, Ra, which was Marduk, which was the son of Enki, was fighting, Enlil. So he captured the Enulites. Moses, or Charlton Heston. Now actually there's some people that believe that he didn't actually even exist. Now I will get to Moses after I've done the 10 plagues and who he was and why he was found in a reed basket. But for now we'll just go along with the first plague where he touched his staff into the water and it turned red. Now the Anunnaki actually do have powerful weapons or power devices of some sort, not necessarily a staff or a rod as described by the Bible, but if you look here, yes, Poseidon, Neptune and Enki are all one of the same, and they do have these trident type things, which is why you see them all over in different locations. But really the red water was probably a thing called red tide, which is where bacteria, etc., and algae turn the water red. The second plague of Egypt was the frogs. Now it's quite easy to work out where these came from. They actually say that they came down the Nile. Now, why would they come down the Nile? Well, if you read the Atrahasis, which is this document here, which predates the Bible, you will find that it actually says that Enlil, the king of the gods, basically tried to block up some of the waterways that forced the frogs down, and he did that because he wanted to actually kill the people, as mentioned in my previous video and in the Astrahasis. So if you want to find out why he was killing people, keep watching, but that's basically why he did it. And of course the frogs had nowhere else to go, so they kept moving down and down as he kept blocking off these different waterways. So in the end they only had one waterway left, so they ended up coming here. And of course during certain seasons they all want to breed, so they leave their little pond, which is now the third plague of ancient Egypt was insects. Now I know some locations in Bibles etc says lice, however there is no flying lice that I can find anywhere, which means it was more than likely mosquitoes. Now if you've watched my previous videos, you'll see that Enlil had deliberately caused a drought, which made the frogs, because they blocked off the waterways, all go down the Nile and end up, so that was another plague. But eventually these frogs died off, and of course the red tide of what was in the water, which was another plague, also made these insects travel and eat off of the dead frogs. So again, Enlil having to deal with Moses. I'll explain who Moses is later. Clearly there's a distinction between Enlil's drought and all these plagues. The fourth plague of ancient Egypt. Now in the Haggadah text it says that it was beasts, however in other literature it kind of makes it sound like it was flies. Now in Hebrew the word avrov is a mixture, so it could actually be both. Now if you think that Enlil had basically blocked off waterways etc, then these animals, flies as well as any other mammals, would have been looking for food and water in a place, so they would have migrated to the next nearest place, which would have been Egypt along the Nile. So that again makes sense, as opposed to an almighty being deciding to send down flies etc. And again the ancient text is the Atrahasis that actually admits that Enlil did cause the drought. So once again another plague I think is just Enlil. The fifth plague of ancient Egypt is where the cattle in Egypt died. Now if you watch my previous videos you'll see that there was frogs and other animals and insects that headed towards Egypt because of Enlil and his drought that he planned. Now once they all got there they all started to die, and insects such as the Calacudes would have fed off of the dead frogs as well as the other animals that had arrived, and then spread to the actual cattle and infected them with diseases, which is quite logical. Now the reason why in the Bible it says the Israelites didn't have their cattle die compared to the Egyptians is really, let's be honest, it's 400 miles from Cairo to Israel. That's a hell of a long distance. I mean England is 420 miles long as the crow flies, so you can imagine these insects not wanting to fly 400. The sixth plague of ancient Egypt is said to have been boils of some description on whatever livestock was left and the humans. Now the story goes that the Lord, which would have been Enlil, would have told Moses and Aaron to throw up some ash of some description into the sky, which caused this disease or plague. Now the nearest volcano, if it was going to be, there's Egypt there, and the nearest volcano is way down here, so the chances of that erupting at the same time possible. But if you go back to the actual logic of everything else has already happened, all of their cattle were dying as said in the last fifth plague, so they had very little to eat and was probably eating rotten things with bacteria etc in it, which would explain why they ended up with all these boils. The seventh plague of ancient Egypt was said to have been fiery storms with rocks coming down that were on fire, which leads us to believe that it was some sort of volcano. Now this actually would lead on from the previous plague, which was number 6, which was where Moses and Aaron was to throw up some ash into the sky. Now if we conclude that a volcano started to produce ash but didn't actually erupt, then that would make sense with the ash, and then obviously when it did start to erupt and more ash came out and smoke clouds, that would then cover and destroy their crops, which is what was said to have happened. So on this one, it may not be an actual plague. In my opinion, it was more than likely a volcano, which Enlil wouldn't have had any control over. Our closest relative, a monkey, chimpanzee, pig. Yes, pig. These are not our closest relatives because these wouldn't be here. These would have evolved into us anyway. And what happened to the ones in between these and us? You can't have something that's not evolved. But the reason why I talk about this is because pigs are being used for human heart transplants, which is great. And the recent one that didn't quite work after a year or so is because they believe that the pig actually had a disease in the first place. They're also doing human kidneys from pigs to humans, and when you try a chimpanzee transplant, you only last for a couple of hours. So pigs are more important to us, and the reason for that is back 10,000 years ago, as agreed by mainstream when it started, humans and boars were genetically bred by the Anunnaki to create pigs, and there is so many similarities. The 8th plague of ancient Egypt is the plague of locusts. Now, it's not really a miracle because when you see other places, such as this one here, that do have plagues of locusts, you know it's not a one-off. It's an event that happens. Now, obviously, the story goes that God told Moses to stretch out his hands and cause a plague of locusts to come and eat all the food, etc., from Egypt. But where did these locusts come from? Well, if you've been watching the previous videos, you'll kind of guess that either a volcano happened shortly before this. Now, all of these are spread over a long period of time. It's not a sudden, 10 days and then all these different plagues happen each 10 days. So it's either a volcano or because, again, all the food was drying up because of the famine that Enlil had caused, they migrated to Egypt. The 9th plague of ancient Egypt was a 3-day period with no sun. Now, it probably wasn't an eclipse because they don't last for 3 days. It could have been a sandstorm, but they probably would have wrote sandstorm instead of an eclipse. However, the most likely possibility is, as mentioned in some of the other videos I've just done about the plagues, there could have been a volcano, and of course the ash would have blocked out the sun for a period of days, as it did in Iceland a few years back. So I don't think this one's another miracle. I think it's possibly again to do with the volcano. So it all started with Enlil and the drought, and then unfortunately over a period of time, these weren't all done day after day. These happened over probably years, these plagues. And as you see, they're probably not really plagues. The 10th plague of ancient Egypt is where the firstborn son would perish, and would the animal, the cattle. Now, it doesn't have to be the firstborn as in, just literally born thereafter. It could be adult firstborn sons who would perish. Now, that would make sense if you was trying to stop an army but didn't want to cause too many problems and have no people left in Egypt whatsoever, so you would probably take out the firstborn. Now, the Pharaoh actually done that at one point himself, let alone God now doing it through Moses. But the way the Israelites that was living in Egypt would protect themselves is by putting a mark above their door in blood, lamb's blood. So that would stop the... Now, I don't think it's a plague. It was probably army people, more Israelites going around killing them on behalf of Enlil, the god. Moses, come on down and collect your tablets. So Moses, was he real or not? I can't actually do the video here because what happened was before, when I did a video on Jesus, a couple of videos in fact, they got pulled off. Now I don't want the same thing to happen about Moses, because you'll see that I'll be talking about Moses differently to how the Bible would probably describe Moses. So what I've done is I've done a 10-minute video on my Patreon page. I know, don't moan at me, it's just a way of not getting it pulled off. There's other videos on my Patreon page. This is a 10-minute video, and look, you got a little clue there. Moses equals demigod. Now I shouldn't be telling you my secrets because I don't want this to get pulled off. So when I do get to Jesus as well, I will have to put them back on Patreon because I don't want them being pulled off. Sorry, don't hate me for that. If this doesn't blow your mind, I don't know what will. So we've all heard the story of the Lord telling Moses to raise his staff and the Red Sea will part so he and his followers can cross it. A one-off miracle, you say? Well, maybe not. Okay, so in the 1950s, 2 French pilots found a set of caves fairly near the Red Sea. And in these caves were papyri. And on the papyri were stories from ancient Egypt. And one of the stories was a pharaoh was watching 2 young women rowing a boat down one of the lakes, and one of the girls dropped their hair clip into the water, and the pharaoh summoned his vizier, who spoke a few words, and the lake parted and they could go and get the hair clip. Now, one-off or a miracle? Or I often get asked what was it like to be a woman back in ancient Egyptian times, and I can't answer that because I wasn't a woman, but I can tell you that in the Old Kingdom women were treated almost equally, and if a husband died, the woman would actually inherit everything that the husband had. So much so that if the woman then died, that materialistic items etc would then move on to the woman's family side, not the husband. So in other words, once the husband dies, that's it, the woman and her family end up getting everything. Now this would have been the same for Sumerian times, and I say they were almost equal. The males were the ones that did go out and do the work, where the women would stay at home and look after children or make the food. And that's not been rude, that's just the way it was back then, because males were more physically strong. So that comes from the Anunnaki, the way they did it. Do you want to know who the first mummy was in ancient Egypt? Well, it's someone we actually know, Osiris. Now this is a colourful representation of Osiris, but he was the one that was chopped up by Set, and Isis, which was his wife stroke half sister, actually bandaged him back together again. That's why you've got some bandages here. Now the local folk, because the story went that Isis ended up becoming pregnant even after he had died, but even though he was bound back, all his body parts were bound back, that the locals then thought, if he can now produce an offspring, even though he was dead, because she took part of his you-know-what and then self-inseminated herself, because technically she was an Anunnaki, they decided that if you can start mummifying people, then you can bring them back to life. Who are you going to call when you're in ancient Egypt and you have ghosts? Well, ghosts was actually a very important thing back then, or spirits. Now, it wasn't just pharaohs that could actually try to communicate with the dead. It was everyday people. In fact, so much so that they would actually write on, and this is one of them, write on the bowls or write on anything, a letter to the loved one asking them for help. And this one, I think, was to do with, will they be able to make their illness go away? They asked for help with positions in power, will they be able to move on up, and love, and all sorts of different things they asked for. Now this is something we don't do today, so there's no evidence of any spirits actually helping them, but there is a hell of a lot of evidence to show they were trying to communicate with the dead. Who are you going to call? Is there any ancient Egyptian historians that could help me at the end of this video? But for now, there was in the olden times an Upper and Lower Egypt. Now we would imagine the lower to be down here and the upper to be up there, but the reason why it was that way is because the water flowed upwards from the Nile. Now, each of those locations actually had their own hats. So Upper Egypt had a white hat and Lower Egypt had a red hat, and then eventually when they were unified, you had that. So next time you're looking at pictures, you can say, aha, that kind of hat was Upper Egypt. Now, this here says that Menes was the person that united the both locations, whereas I always thought, and bearing in mind exactly the same date there, that Horus did compared to that person. So anyone got any clues? Because they're both showing the same dates, and I thought it was Horus. Giants in ancient times were conceived as being the bad people, such as eating humans and eating their own kind. However, dwarfs, pygmies, midgets, or little people, forgive me if any of those terms upset you, I don't know any other terms to use, they were revered. They had a ranking system, and these were highly ranked. Now, this is because in Sumerian times, the ancient gods used to have these as entertainers, which I guess is where we ended up with them as the court jester way down the line further in history. But back then, they actually entertained the gods, and then when it moved on to Egyptian times, they also, the pharaohs also used the smaller people to perform entertainment tasks, as well as bring in food to the pharaohs. Now, they also had their own tombs and were mummified. Who built the Sphinx? Was it an alien race called the Anunnaki? Now, before you click no, it was not, and it was the Egyptians that done it. How much research have you actually done yourself into Anunnaki? And the Anunnaki as an alien race were 8 to 12 foot tall, and they ended up having children, and those children ended up being pharaohs, etc., as well as some creations that they actually done using DNA, which is why we've still got the tall people. And obviously their demigods ended up in Rome and Greece, etc. Now, the Sphinx was actually talked about in the Lost Book of Enki, which is from tablets which are in the British Museum, so they are genuine. Now, it talks about Enki allowing Ningazida, which was his son, to build the pyramids, and once he built the pyramids, there was a monument built, which was the Sphinx, with Ningazida's face on it, because Ningazida designed the pyramids. So who do you think built it? The Scales of Justice in the TV series Moon Knight is based off the Book of the Dead, which is an ancient papyrus writing which actually has spells to help you pass through the underworld. Now, you're generally a wandering soul once you die, and the Book of Dead actually helps you with instructions to get to the Hall of Judgment, and once you're there, you're in front of 42 separate gods with 42 different doors, and each time you go up to one of these doors, you have to admit that you didn't cause one of the particular sins that the gods are asking you about. Now, that's very similar to your life review when you die. So you may have heard that when you die you have judgment, but technically it's not judgment, it's a life review that clairvoyants say you review your own life from every possible angle and from what other people think of you. Follow for the next part. The ancient Book of the Dead, which is the ancient Egyptian papyrus, talks about negative confessions, which is 42 questions really posed by the 42 different underworld gods, and if you get them wrong, you ceased to move on and you die, even though you're underworld and dead already. Now, the book itself is the Book of the Dead is actually really a cheat book. It's trying to help you get through. So if you've studied that book, then when you're in the underworld, you will know the answers. Now, these 42 questions, 10 of which are pretty much what's in the Moses 10 Commandments. So thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not do something with the neighbour's wife, and so on. So if you are asked those in the underworld, you will know what to say when the time comes to pass that. Now, the next bit, keep watching and I'll talk about the Scales of Justice. I'm going to tell you a secret about the pyramids that a few people know, but they will never tell you. So you're going to find out on video number 793. Once that comes up and is live, feel free to share it, because it probably will be pulled off. If you manage to successfully answer all 42 questions in the Egyptian underworld in the ancient times, and you didn't get one wrong and wasn't eaten by a giant scorpion, then you go through to the weighing of the heart, which is literally, we see here a depiction of scales. Now this is done in front of Osiris, and we know where he was. If you've been watching my videos, you'll know, because of the colour of his hat, whether he previously was Upper or Lower Egypt. Now obviously we know he died. Now your heart is a scarab heart that you give over to the scales, and that's in front of Osiris, but you give the heart to Anubis. So then it gets weighed, and the heart covers your intelligence, emotion and mind. And if you are successful, follow for the next video. I'm running. Congratulations, you've made it to the scales of justice in the Egyptian underworld, which is where you give your scarab beetle heart to the scales, and it's weighed against a feather from the goddess Ma'at. Now if we have a look who Ma'at was, just so happens she was married to Ra. Now if anyone knows who Ra is, Marduk, so that means Ma'at would have been either the goddess Sarapatinu, forgive me pronunciations, or Nananya. Sometimes it's also got two N's in there. So that's who that is. Now the problem is there was a monster, this type of monster. Now have a look at the difference between his legs, his back, etc, etc, and I'll cover this in more details in the next video because I'm running out of time. Amit was the creature monster of the underworld, and as you see there, it's made up of many different things: crocodile, lion, hippo and possibly some others. Now this would eat your heart, the scarab heart that you've given. If you've watched my previous videos, you know what I'm waffling on about. And if it eats it, you cease to exist, even though you're actually already dead. Now the scales of justice have to weigh equally, so your heart and the feather have to be the same weight. Now the Book of the Dead was trying to give you cheat codes or cheat spells that would allow the heart not to give away the secret once it's put on. So if you did do something bad, like cheat with thy neighbour's wife, because you've been reading the Book of the Dead and you knew the spell, this spell protected that from going lower or higher, so it had to be equal. And if it was equal, you pass and you go on to live an underworld life. At the end of this video, I'm going to tell you a secret that you won't know about some of the pyramids. Now, here is an overhead shot of the Great Pyramid, and as you see, the blocks are different colours to the rest of the blocks. There's hardly any weathering whatsoever on these, and that's because these have been put up to hide the hole, which they don't show you in the images of what's in the pyramids, because this hole, as mentioned before in other videos, it produces a light that comes through the top, through the capstone, which wasn't solid gold, and the light beam actually went up into space. Watch my videos or do some research and you'll come across that information. Now if you have a look here from a previous time, there is a sunken in area there, whereas here it's not sunken in, so you can see that they have been messing around with that. Now the Great Pyramid supposedly is, from some people say it's a water plant, which is, you know, I don't get that. I mean, look, you could have just built the whole thing. Obviously people then also, other people say it's a tomb, but it's not a tomb. No pharaohs were ever buried in any pyramids whatsoever. But you know, they could have just knocked up instead of 2.3 billion blocks, a million blocks, they could have just built that if they was going to do it. Or they could have chopped off half of it and saved them another million odd blocks to put up. So I don't think it is. Now the capstone is supposed to be gold. You will not find it gold anywhere. You will never find information other than people saying it should be gold. And the actual ancient text said it was 3 different materials which allowed the light beam that I mentioned earlier to go through. So forget gold, we've been lied to. And people say that the pyramids were cast in concrete, limestone concrete. However, as you see here with one of the descriptions, they're saying that they need a mould, and unfortunately this mould is not going to work because each block of these 2.3 million were different sizes. So you would have had 2.3 million different sized blocks. Now let's get on to the smallest pyramid. Now in ancient texts, they actually say that Ningazida, who was an Anunnaki, actually made a small version, a prototype of the larger pyramid, which is exactly what that one is. So now you know this is built, and they won't show you the tops of it where there's another hole, and they won't show you the inside properly. And this is what a tomb looks like. Have a look. So it wasn't a tomb. I mean, tombs do not look like pyramids. And this is what supposedly the inside of that small pyramid looks like. But you, again, they're lying to you, because there would have been points going up into the top. So we have written records, ancient texts, saying that this was a prototype of the larger one, which makes sense instead of that being a tomb, because no bodies were ever found in it. Hope that all makes sense. There seems to be a great deal of confusion when it comes to what the pyramids were actually built for. Ancient texts say it was a beacon to send a light up into space to help the other Anunnaki know that they'd moved. Now this was built around 10,000 BCE or 12,000 years ago. So yes, it does have power. It was put on a ley line, and in the ancient texts they talk about using crystals inside to help generate the power or the light beam that's required. Now we know that because when we watched the live TV broadcast from the National Geographic where they was going along this shaft in the Great Pyramid, there is no exit there. You'll never see one on the walls of the Great Pyramid because it never ever exited there. The National Geographic showed that it actually went back up towards the top. Same goes with that one. So again, supporting the light beam theory. Now, where these people say this could have been a power pump, yes, it possibly could have, but it wasn't a power pump to supply water to, areas, because there's no evidence whatsoever of any aqueducts or any piping system or anything. Bearing in mind, there virtually wasn't anything around there. So what were they pumping it for if there's no settlements? So the nearest settlements would have been further down, as you see here. We're going down to Luxor, etc. So why not build the pyramids down here instead of there? Because the pyramid wasn't built to pump water this far. If it used water to help produce the light beam, fine, but it wasn't a pump. There's no evidence whatsoever. And of course the pyramid was placed precisely on a ley line, which is why we're getting the electricity that even the Sun News admits that the Giza pyramid does actually still have energy produced from it. So hopefully you kind of understand it's a mixture of a few things. One is it does produce power, but it's not power for everywhere else, it's just power for itself. Two, it is on a ley line, so it's still producing power. Three, it did have crystals in there. Ancient texts talk about the crystals being destroyed by Marduk. Long story, watch my videos or do some research and it all will tell you. And finally, the light beam was, as we see now in Las Vegas, where they have a pyramid with the light beam coming up, they already knew. And yes, the top capstone was not solid gold. You'll never find anywhere that can actually prove solid gold. It's all guessing. And the ancient texts talk about it being 3 different materials. Meteorites on Mars could preserve evidence of ancient alien life. Now, we're not actually talking about the Anunnaki here, we're talking about microbes. However, the Anunnaki, or the Aigigi, which were the younger Anunnaki, were on Mars for a couple of 100,000 years. So that's why we seem to have all these artifacts that we can find on Mars, such as that door that's recently been shown on photographs from a Mars rover expedition. And if you're interested in finding out what the Anunnaki did on Mars, on my Patreon page, I've got Aigigi on Mars, and it talks about what the actual ancient texts say about the Aigigi. These are not Aigigi. And it talks about whether or not there was oxygen there, and whether or not oxygen is available today on Mars, and whether there was water. So this is all on my Patreon page if anyone wants to watch that video. Recently in Egypt they have found a temple that honours Zeus, but it's not the Zeus, because Zeus would have been in Mesopotamian times Enlil. And here you'll see it says it's a mixture emerges between Zeus, which would have been Enlil, and Mount Cassius. So here it says the temple honours Zeus Cassius, a deity who merges Zeus and Mount Cassius, located on the border of Syria and Turkey. The mountain associated with the legendary battle that took place between Zeus and the monster Typhon to decide who would rule the cosmos. Zeus won with the help of his trusty lightning bolt. Now, that's not the way I see it. Ninurta, who would have been Apollo, is the son of Zeus, which was Enlil, and he had the actual battle in that same location with lightning bolts. Massive battle in Sumerian history, and he killed Anzu, who was stealing the tablets of destiny. So that was actually the battle in that location. So I think I might be right and they might be wrong. Maybe. Keep watching if you want me to prove mainstream lie. Okay, here's an article. Archaeology breakthrough, a stunning Egyptian tomb poised to reveal Pharaoh's secrets. So basically this article talks about archaeologists unearth an ancient tomb next to the Step Pyramid in Saqqara, where King Diyusha was buried inside. Now, anyone that knows anything knows there was no bodies ever found in any pyramid. So let's have a look what else people talk about. Well, then they actually say elsewhere that the body was removed by ancient thieves. In other words, because there's no body, they use the old excuse, well, it was ancient thieves that took it, and only left a mummified foot. Okay, so let's have a look even more. Now, this is the actual tomb they're referring to in that stepped pyramid. As you can see there, it is a colossus thing, and as you can see, it was untouched. So somehow they managed to get in there. But let's just have a look. This is supposed to be a tomb. Now, all tombs, and proper tombs, not pyramids, have hieroglyphs around. Even if they're unfinished, they still have hieroglyphs. In fact, the tomb that they're referring to that's next to that, these are the actual hieroglyphs there, and people can see them. But in the Step Pyramid, where they pretend that a pharaoh was buried because they don't want us to know the truth, you'll see that there is no hieroglyphs whatsoever, because no pyramid was a tomb. Coincidence or Anunnaki bringing materials from space to Earth? Now, these here are small fragments of extraterrestrial stones found in Egypt. Now, that's funny. Let's have a look. Egypt. Where's Egypt? Very near. There's the Nile there. So Egypt is here, and Mesopotamia is there. The Anunnakis were there, and as we know, the Anunnakis were there as Ra, etc., and Ptah. So, how come the meteorites always seem to land? And now, also, don't forget, Tutankhamun's knife handle was also made of meteorite. So, you've got to start asking yourself, why is meteorites hitting Egypt / Mesopotamia? When you have a look at the actual how the planet works, and yes, it's round. Don't even get me started on flat Earth. Not only is it spinning, it's also going round in an orbit. So, how come all of these meteorites seem to be landing in that particular... This gentleman here, Robert Curzon, would have told you to your face in 1834 that there were manuscripts that belonged in the Bible in ancient Egypt. However, if you read the article, it carries on and says that they were, most of them were kept under lock and key, which means they were hiding them for a reason. Now, if you scroll down and carry on reading, basically it talks about this gentleman finding out about these manuscripts that were in a monastery in Egypt. Now, we kind of know that we're never going to see those manuscripts that belong, and it goes on about the Christian texts, etc., why they was hidden. But really, we know why they were hidden, or I do, because I think they would have talked about the Anunnaki, would have talked about gods, etc., that would have changed the way that Christians would have believed in God. So unfortunately, I think once again we've been lied to, and we'll never see the light of day.
Petrify, not at all. Things can petrify very quickly. We've got some examples here on the table of things that petrified very quickly. I'll show you those in a second. Here's a picture of a petrified water wheel. Here's petrified firewood. It was chopped on before it got petrified. You can go to Southern Forest World Museum in Georgia, Waycross, Georgia. There's a mummified dog stuck inside a tree. Some people say it's petrified. I don't know if it's mummified. I've not been there yet. But anyway, how can a dog get mummified just in probably a few years? Chased a coon up the tree, got stuck. They named it Stucky, of course. That's the name for the dog. They had a contest to name it, and so they called it Stucky. They cut the tree down for firewood. There's a dog inside. Here's a petrified cowboy boot with the cowboy's legs still in it. The boot was made in the 1950s. Got his leg shot off or torn off or who knows what, but there's his leg petrified. Here's a petrified fish giving birth. A petrified hammer was found from a Marine barracks from World War II. Petrified hammer. Petrified hat found in New Zealand. Here's a kid, a kid sent me this right here on the table, a petrified crayon found in Arizona. I mean, the crayon is turned to stone. We have right here a petrified pickle. It's in our museum. Well, it's here tonight, but a guy sent me this and the jar with it. The jar is still in our museum. He said, Brother Hovind, I found this old house in Montana. The roof was gone. The house had been empty at least 30 years. But we were digging around through what's left of this house and found the pantry. And there were pickle jars in there, but the lid to one of the jars rusted, and the pickle inside turned to stone. Would you like it for your museum? I said, well, yeah, of course. One kid wrote me a letter. Here's the letter right here. He said, Brother Hovind, I was 8 years old doing a science experiment. I put a bunch of acorns in a bucket of water to see if they would sprout. And I forgot about them. A year later, my mom saw the bucket on the back porch. She said, get rid of that bucket and all that junk out there. He said, the acorns had turned to stone in 1 year. I have right here a baggie of petrified acorns. It doesn't take long, folks. Don't let them tell you it takes millions of years for things to petrify. It's not true. A guy sent me a picture of a petrified pin cushion. The pin cushion, you can see the pins had rusted off except where you can see the rust marks where the pins had been stuck in there. Petrified pin cushion. They dug up a grave in Tennessee several years ago. They found the body of the person inside the grave had petrified, turned to stone. The doctor died and they buried him. 14 years later, his wife died. This is back in 1881. They dug a hole to bury Grandma, and water went into the hole. And they thought, oh, we don't want to bury Grandma in the water, so they buried her someplace else. Then the kids got worried about Grandpa in that moving water. It hit an underground spring, apparently. So they dug up Grandpa. He'd been in the ground 14 years. And the article says, the occupant of the coffin had been turned to stone, presumably as a result of the continual flow of water. It said the arms had rotted off, but the rest of the body had turned to stone, petrified. A guy found a petrified man in Montana. He took it 5'8". The guy carried it around as a museum curiosity for years in carnivals and fairs and stuff. Petrified body of a man found on the beach in Montana, in a beach of a river. In Sao Paulo, Brazil, a lady went into the hospital. She said, my side's been hurting. The lady was 62 years old. They x-rayed her and found a petrified fetus, a baby, inside. She had been pregnant. The baby almost came to term and died, apparently, and turned to stone inside her body. 62-year-old lady with a petrified baby inside. Here's the article. You can read it for yourself. I met a guy in Maryland who said he worked at a hospital, Brian Lackey, who lives in Washington, but there's his phone number. He was in Maryland. He said they brought a lady in there and took out a petrified fetus out of her body. The baby's in the museum now, or in a medical hospital up there. Petrified fetus. Here's petrified sacks of flour found in Arkansas. A flour mill flooded. The flour turned to stone. The sacks of flour were buried in water and mud and turned to rock. So the Bible says the high hills were covered. The earth was totally covered by a flood. 15 cubits, that's about 22 feet, over the mountains. So the skeptics say, where'd all the water go? Oh, it's still here. The Bible says in Genesis chapter 8, the water's assuaged. That means to drop down, to sink down. If we filled this room 4 feet deep in water, and then all of a sudden the floor caved in over here and dropped down 10 feet, that's going to suck all the water from there into the hole. Well, during the flood, you'd get this sinking process as the ocean floors would drop out and the water would rush into those holes. The Bible says the water stood above the mountains. So I think during the first few months of the flood, the animals sorted out and fossils were forming. During the last part of the flood, the plates of the earth are still shifting and they're unstable, and they began to lift up or sink down different places. Thin spots sink down, other
$800 videos. Thank you so much to all those that supported me and followed me. Those of you that are new, feel free to watch my videos from 1 onwards. They are in chronological order, so it makes a lot more sense. And if you want to watch them on TikTok, you can, or go to my website, which is in the link or down here somewhere. And coming up in the next lot of videos, we're going to go change the tact from Egypt to ancient Greece, and we're going to find out that the Anunnaki, yes, those guys again, were actually here, and we will cover exactly why. And there's going to be some things in there that only I know I sound big-headed, but you've watched my other videos, you know that a lot of the stuff I say is very well researched. I will show you things that you will not know, no one else has said about ancient Greece, and hopefully it will blow your mind, as I have hopefully done in the previous 799 odd videos. So thank you and keep watching.